So one thing that we just want to remind everyone is that since most educators here in Rhode Island have been have completed the Right to Read Act training, we know that thinking about what types of learning students need to have and instruction that they need to have, we know that we can help most students learn how to read. So I'm sure this Dr. Louisa Moat's quote that you're seeing here on the screen is probably not new to you if you've completed your proficiency training. I'm not sure if we included it in the awareness training, but Dr. Louisa Moat's does pop up within the awareness training practices. But we know that if we use those evidence-based instructional strategies with students, we can get most students reading. And we all know that ensuring that all of our students know how to read is pivotal to their learning and their success. So the PLP guidance update, one thing that we wanted to make sure that you knew is that the PLP expectations have not changed. This is more of an opportunity for us to update the document. It was long overdue and something that we have been wanting to do here at RIDE for some time. You will note that the updates are pretty much as far as like kind of evolving with the language of our time, if you will. So as language has evolved in education, we've been sure to make sure that that is reflected within the document itself. We have aligned it more clearly with the MTSS process, along with RIDE initiatives that are happening. So we want to make sure that as people look at the PLP guidance, they are able to see and make connections to what else it is that they are doing. So the PLP background, we have the PLP expectations. So in case you're not that familiar with it, grades K to 5, it is in Rhode Island general law that any student reading below grade level must have a PLP in place. And then it is also for students in grades 6 through 12, and it is within the the RIDE secondary regulations. So those regulations governing the secondary education include at 2.2.2.b that any student that is reading 1 or more years below grade level needs to also have a PLP. So it is rooted in the expectation, rooted within law and regulation that our students have plans in place. So what is a personal literacy plan? Well, the personal literacy plan is a plan of action that's used to accelerate a student's ability to reach grade level of proficiency in literacy. It's a problem-solving approach that we use to develop this plan in order to determine a student's specific needs, goals, course of action. And we make sure that when we are developing a PLP, that we are inclusive as far as who is participating within that process, and also thinking about what else it is that we need in order to help that student achieve. And I think what's key here to say that it's just not limited to teachers, parents, and administrators. So thinking about who is the appropriate person to be on that particular student's PLP is going to depend upon what that student's needs are. The other question that we get asked quite a bit is, how is reading below grade level defined? Because within the law and the regulations, it uses that phrasing. What's important to know that since RIDE does not, or Rhode Island does not have a required screener, it is up to the individual LEAs to define what reading below grade level actually means. I would add that it's also really important that the data from your district selected screener is in alignment and or confirmed by additional assessment data that you collect within your district. So that could be that the screening data is also flagging students that perhaps have already been flagged if they are already, have been within your system for at least a year or so by either RICAS, perhaps it's a CBM that you have, or any other data that you do collect within the district. Give me just one moment, please. Thank you. I have some more friends joining us now. All right, so who requires a PLP? As I mentioned earlier, the students in K to 5 require a PLP if they're reading below grade level in accordance with the general law. 6 through 12, again, it is 1 or more years below grade level, and that's in accordance with the Rhode Island secondary regulations. One thing that I would point out is that the regulations, while they have been revised several times over the, the last decade or so, and those in the secondary know that those have gone through multiple revisions. They have always included this particular expectation for students that we continue to support our students who are struggling to read. We also wanted to call out that our MLLs do require a PLP if they are reading below grade level in English. And the same for our 6 through 12 MLLs who are reading 1 or more years below grade level in English also require a PLP. Thinking about our differently abled students, what's important to know that if a student with an IEP who is reading below grade level, they will also require a PLP. And I know that that's something that often pops up, but it's important that we're doing that progress monitoring that we'll talk about a little bit more within the presentation. And again, the same as for our students through 6 through 12. So as you can see, it kind of mirrors the same with grades 5, K to 5, excuse me, and 6 to 12. So who creates the PLP? And this is one thing that RIDE has really kind of provided a structure for the districts to be able to encounter, one that they want to be able to allow people to use who is the most appropriate person to help create the PLP. We know within the districts that there are many different staffing personnel who are in one district that might not have the same job or role within another district. What's important is that it starts with the student, their family, and their teachers that they have. It can then extend to your MTSS team that you have. Perhaps that might include the reading specialist or a special educator. Your building administrator is really important to have on that team as you start to think about what are your students' needs from the screener that you're seeing and what determining if further diagnostic information is needed or who else might need to be brought into the process. And that might look different depending upon the age of the student. You know, if you've got a secondary student who has a PLP, you might want that school counselor or school psychologist involved if you know that you're having difficulty having that student, you know, attend school if they're having disrupted learning due to the fact that they're just not frankly coming to school. The same is the case also if it's an elementary student who's missing a ton of school. You know, what is it that's keeping the student home and how can we make sure that we get them in there? So I think one of the things that we just want folks to be aware of is that who is creating the PLP may differ within the districts. We have some information that kind of delineates who should be expected to do it, but as far as who is on the team helping to create it and support that student is rather inclusive. So documenting the PLPs, that's always something that comes up with folks when they're inquiring about PLPs. One thing to note is that RIDE does not require a specific form for the PLPs. What it does do is it does have required elements that all of the PLPs must include. So just as we have many different districts with many different ways that they like to operate, we have just as many different PLP forms that people use. Some have incorporated it into their student information system. And I do know that there are some places that still use good old paper and pencil in order to document their PLPs. What's important to note is that for the LEA, we need the LEAs to have a coherent system. They need to have it so that it's accessible and that that documentation is being captured. It is pivotal that the teachers are capturing what it is that they're doing in order to support the student and to show that either the intervention is working or it is not, because that information is pivotal in us trying to figure out what's going on with the student and why are they not reading on grade level. One thing that gets asked of us is, can I use the MTSS intervention plans as PLPs? And we say absolutely yes. If you have other documentation within your district that you would like to use, you may also use that if it includes all of the required PLP elements. And over the years, we've talked to several district people who say that we use this document and they've shared it with us and we've, you know, kind of walked through it together if we want to. You can avoid that duplication. So then that way you don't have that duplicate paperwork going back and forth. We just need to make sure that people have access to the information, that need to have access to the information, and that we're documenting what it is that the student is doing and the teachers are doing with that student as well. The same can be said as far as coordinating the PLPs with the individual learning plan systems that are happening at our secondary level. That one is definitely one that I know that we've talked to folks on the phone at the secondary level and trying to figure out what their ILP systems look like and what is the best plan of attack, if you will, in order to be able to capture that PLP information and data given what their ILP system looks like. So again, RIDE does not require a specific form for the PLP. We do have a sample one provided within the guidance. If somebody wants to use it, you're welcome to use it. It is old school paper pencil, kind of printed out for you kind of document. You're welcome to do that. But it's also helpful to just have it there because it has all the required elements, and then you can do a cross check between that particular document and the system and or product that you use within your district. Another item that we included within the guidance or the updates, if you will, to it is thinking about what is needed for a successful implementation of a PLP. And so we know that it needs to be rooted within a strong foundation of the science of reading and structured literacy, those high quality instructional materials that students have access and teachers have access to, along with interventions, and the MTSS process. So this chart was included and developed for the update to the guidance in order to be able to articulate the spectrum of responsibilities at the district, school, and teacher level. It may look different within your particular school, but we wanted to kind of give some sort of structure so that teams can kind of determine their readiness for PLP implementation. So if you use this chart for looking at it from the left side and then moving to the right, teams can determine what are they missing, if anything. Maybe they have redundancies. How can we kind of alleviate any of those redundancies that are out there as well? So that was kind of the intention of coming up with this particular chart, was to help districts kind of be reflective and or schools be reflective on their system for PLP implementation. We also updated the roles and responsibilities for the grade band. One thing I want to let you know is that this particular chart on the screen is not inclusive of all roles. So just I wanted to be able to share with you the structure that is there. The MTSS team and all of its sub-bullets mirror in K-5, do mirror the ones that are in 6 through 12. So just throwing that out there right now for somebody to be like, why is there only one bullet within the MTSS teams in K-5? That explains it. We wanted to be able to fit it all on one slide for you, but the actual document itself does include all of them. You can see that the roles and responsibilities within the grade band are a little bit different and reflective of those particular grade bands. You'll see within the K-5, we're talking about a classroom teacher and the qualified literacy teacher. One thing that we often get flagged on is, what is a qualified literacy teacher? And one thing that we want to be careful with is thinking about that only this one person can help students learn how to read. If someone happens to have specialized training and that is what that student needs, then we need to ensure that that teacher is the one working with the student, and how can we make sure that we bring that student up to speed to where they need to be. So a very kind of out of the box kind of thinking is that you have a music teacher and they happen to be Orton Gillingham certified. You have a student that is in need of that. You know that that is the best course of action. Then perhaps that teacher who is the qualified literacy teacher is the best teacher to work with that particular student. I know it's a wild example, but we want to make sure that people know that we want the people with the right knowledge, training, and understanding working with our students. And sometimes that might mean it's the classroom teacher as well. So I mean, just something to think about when we think about what that qualified literacy teacher looks like. Lastly, we also, since the PLPs were originally implemented, many educators have remarked to us over the years of the similarities between the PLP and the expectations of RTI, that old response to intervention acronym that everybody knew. In fact, the original PLP cycle was drawn from the RTI work that initiated back out of Iowa back in the day, or Nebraska. I'm not sure. It was one of those Midwest states. I apologize to the Midwest for that. But I believe it was Iowa in the day. With our updates, we made sure that the guidance more directly connects to the MTSS process used in schools today. So we're making deliberate connections to it. That was something that we knew was missing within the original. But I think what's really important on this slide, and I want to reinforce with everyone, is that these PLP supports, they support students who require intervention in addition to differentiated core instruction, or that tier 1. So I think that's really important, that their intervention is in addition to the differentiated core instruction. And I know as many folks are rolling out new high quality curriculum materials, that's the work of the implementation that many of you are doing right now that you understand and are implementing the curriculum with integrity and thinking about what are those direct moves that we need to make in order to support all of our students as we implement this shared curriculum across the grade and across the district and even across the state. So that's a key point that we want folks to kind of walk away with and remember, is that the PLP supports, they support the students who require intervention in addition to the differentiated core instruction. And those interventions do need to be systematic instructional plans. We need to be utilizing evidence-based materials and practices, so that way we can, graph our progress and see where it is that we are going. All right, and I'm going to hand it off to Trish, and she is going to share with us the PLP cycle.
Thank you, Colleen. So as Colleen mentioned in prior iterations of the PLP guidance, we've talked about the PLP cycle, but in this new version, we have provided updates to a lot of it. So looking at the PLP cycle, it's important to recognize that the process responds to students in a timely fashion that are not reading at grade level. The process is cyclical because students may need a series of interventions in order to read on grade level and meet grade level standards. This cycle is intended to align to your Tier 3 and Tier 2 MTSS processes. So the first step in our cycle is to identify needs. This involves identifying students who are at risk through the use of universal screening data. Your universal screeners could be STAR, iReady, DIBELS. Taking that screening data, analyzing your evidence to validate your screening results and determine specific areas of need. When you look at your specific areas of need, you may find it necessary to gather additional information because it just the screener isn't giving enough, but it has flagged areas where we need to dive a little bit deeper. So we would administer a diagnostic assessment. Once you have all of your sets of data collected and analyzed, you would make an assessment as to whether a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 intervention should be provided for the student. So here are some examples of skills to assess for early identification of reading difficulties. The literacy screeners should assess these skills in K through 2. Some commonalities are at all 3 levels, the screeners should assess alphabetic knowledge and rapid automatized naming, also known as RAN. Phonemic awareness is assessed in kindergarten and grade 1. Reading fluency is assessed in grades 1 and 2. And in 2nd grade, we add in some comprehension assessment. As you look through the updated PLP guidance, you'll find that there are sample tasks that provide data for each of these areas. Now we move on to looking at how to design an intervention plan. The intervention plan process should engage teachers, families, and other relevant qualified professionals. Going back to who is that qualified literacy teacher, it could be an Orton Gillingham teacher that is also the phys ed teacher. Anyone who is qualified and anyone who's qualified could be part of that team. So teachers involved in this step should have the knowledge of the science of reading and structured literacy. And when you're sitting with the team and designing the intervention plan, it would be helpful to consider the materials that the HQIM has that could be supportive with intervention. It's important to think about the coherence between intervention materials and core. So you're trying to tie the content that you're learning in your core to the content that you're teaching in intervention. That's your connection between your core and your intervention, but also supporting the fact that all students get tier 1 or core instruction. Another question to think about would be who's qualified to provide the intervention and what is the frequency of the intervention, as well as which tools would be used to progress monitor. As you explore the new updated guidance document, you will find that there are additional considerations to think about when designing the plan. So the implementation of interventions is cyclical itself because oftentimes students will need a series of intervention cycles in order to reach grade level standard. Interventions should be implemented and progress monitored for 8 to 12 week cycles. So here's an example of graphed progress monitoring data. If you take a look at this, you'll notice a trend line, which is dotted, and a goal line, which is the solid one. The trend line illustrates the line of best fit through the data points, while the goal line is established by plotting a line from your baseline score to your goal score. This is also in your updated guidance, but if we take a look at this first example on the left, you'll notice that there is a trend line that is steeper than the goal line. So what that tells us is that the student has met or is on track to meet the goal by the end of the intervention cycle. That middle graph is an example that demonstrates a trend line below the goal line, but the student is making progress toward the goal, just not enough. So it illustrates that progress is being made, but not at an adequate rate of improvement. And then the final example shows the trend line below the goal line, and the gap is widening. So that indicates that insufficient progress has been made. And that brings us to the next step, which is analyzing outcomes. What this is if student has met or is on track of meeting a goal by the end of intervention, ideally you continue with the intervention until the student has met the goal. You review the diagnostic data, determine if there are additional areas of need, and if so, you create a new intervention plan. If there are no additional areas of need, use an outcome measure to determine if the student is reading on grade level. If so, they can be exited from their PLP. If some progress has been made, but not at the adequate rate of improvement, the team should consider whether or not the intervention has been implemented with fidelity. If it hasn't, then come up with a plan to ensure that intervention can be completed with fidelity. If it has been, then thinking about intensifying the intervention by adjusting your dosage. So providing additional opportunities for practice and feedback, and alignment of instruction to your goal area. So you increase the focus on discrete skills. If there is insufficient progress being made, then it's important to consider whether the intervention has been provided with fidelity again. And if it hasn't, make those adjustments. And whether or not the progress monitoring tool is matched to the specific needs of the student and the instruction. If it is, then confer with the team to plan for individualized instruction and intensify based on the student's specific needs. If the intervention wasn't provided with fidelity or the progress monitoring tool was not matched to the instruction, then it's important to analyze the diagnostic data and modify the focus of intervention and address the factors that affect your fidelity. So that brings us to the question of, when does a student no longer require a PLP? Elementary students whose progress monitoring or outcome data indicate they're reading on grade level no longer require a PLP. Each LEA, school, district should have a system for monitoring students after they discontinue the PLP to ensure that they continue to maintain grade level. Secondary students continue with the PLP until the data indicates they are reading less than 1 year below grade level. When elementary students with PLPs transition to secondary, they require that PLP until they're reading less than 1 year below grade level. So they leave elementary school and maintain it until they were less than 1 year below. However, LEAs may decide to continue the secondary students with PLPs until they are on grade level. The LEAs should create and maintain a system for PLP documentation. As we mentioned earlier, it could be the paper and pencil, it could be in your student support systems, it could be on another platform, but it is essential to have access to those plans for future reference. When a student's PLP is discontinued, the parents must be notified, and that is in accordance with the Basic Education Program regulations. So another point to consider is our multilingual learners and what a PLP would look like for them. Screening MLLs with valid and reliable measures in both their first and second language helps identify students who need immediate intervention in order to reduce the overrepresentation of multilingual students in special education. Screening is especially critical in kindergarten through grade 2, where the widespread belief is that reading-based deficits are due to a lack of English language proficiency instead of a potential disability. Studies have consistently shown a correlation between measures of phonological awareness, alphabetic knowledge, and oral reading fluency with measures of reading comprehension for MLLs in kindergarten through 5th grade. So screeners that address these skills are recommended for identifying MLLs who may be at risk for reading failure. Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions must be culturally and linguistically responsive. They must align with the student's specific instructional needs and consistently address both foundational literacy skills and language development. It's important here to think about the fact that some Tier 2 and Tier 3 materials do not provide the language support, which will impact the student's rate of progress. So educators who provide these interventions should have knowledge of second language acquisition and the role of language proficiency in literacy growth in order to provide those simultaneous language supports. So when we reflect on MLL's literacy and language skills, one point in time assessments may not accurately reflect their skills and knowledge. A body of evidence must be compiled in order to understand their language and literacy strengths and needs, as well as establish instructional goals. And I'm going to turn it back to Colleen to talk about literacy screening. Colleen, you're muted.
Yeah. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We've only been doing Zoom for how long, and I forget to unmute myself. Anywho, literacy screening guidance. As many districts are adopting new curriculum, we've received numerous calls regarding screening assessments. Folks have inquired that they would like to have a new screener. They don't know which one to go with, or we've actually had some reach out to us and said, hey, listen, we've actually just completed our Right to Read Act training and Science of Reading training through, our provider that we had. And we're realizing that the assessment that we have is not giving us the information that we need at the particular grade levels, or in particular grade levels. Those teachers are coming to us and saying, hey, in kindergarten, we're not getting the data that we need from X particular assessment that we're using for screening. So what RIDE was able to do was that we were producing and sharing with you now a companion document, if you will, to the PLP, and we're introducing you to the literacy screening guidance. So the importance of screening, as many of us know on here, is that it is a first alert or an indication of students being at risk for reading below grade level. We know that the screening assessments are administered to all students, and they're usually quick and easy because we've got to get it to a lot of kids and we need that data back fast. What they do not do is identify or diagnose a disability. So that's really important for people to understand. And I often find especially parents need to understand that. So then that way they know what it is. We do know that when thinking about those literacy screening assessments, that they can often answer a few of those questions for us. It can answer which students are at risk, or perhaps who's experiencing some sort of difficulty that perhaps is flying under our radar within the classroom. It can also identify how significant is that risk? Is it something that we need to sound the alarm on really loudly, or is it something that we know that we can kind of have somebody jump in to an intervention and we're pretty confident that within, either 1 or 2 6 to 8 week interventions, we'll be able to get that, student back up and running and on their way to success. And finally, it often can answer what general areas is the student struggling with as far as reading is concerned. I think I might have skipped a slide, so let's go back. Nope, I didn't. So dyslexia screeners. We know that we wanted to address dyslexia screeners because we know that they're coming up more and more. And we now know that with everybody kind of talking about needing the science of reading and structured literacy, dyslexia usually comes along for the ride, I find, even though they are discrete in their different areas of expertise. What the dyslexia screeners that are out there, they often include measures that assess phonemic awareness and alphabetic knowledge in kindergarten to grade 2. And then they do fluency in grades 2 and above. They also look at rapid automatic naming in pre-K to grade 2, along with oral language, specifically looking at vocabulary and or listening comprehension in that pre-K to grade 2. So that's usually what that dyslexia screener is going to pull the information from in order to kind of flag it for you, because usually it's a flag to say that this student is weak in these particular areas. This is something that you might want to dig more deeply into. So within the literacy screening guidance, we actually have used a tool. And within that, what we did was we wanted to create an area where we could have a resource for all of you to be able to learn about and compare literacy screeners, because we know that there are a lot of them out there on the market. Some of them are really strong, as we all know, and some of them are probably not as strong as we would like them to be. So our big caveat, and it's in bold at the top of the slide, is to remind everyone that we are not endorsing a specific screening assessment. Rather, this tool was created to help provide a list. It is not a comprehensive list. There are some others that are out there. It's a list, but it's a place for us to start these conversations, to start thinking about what grade levels does this particular screening tool cover? How is it administered? What languages is it administered within? How long does it take? How often is it administered? What are the possible progress monitoring tools? What does it actually assess? I think that's a really good question that sometimes we take for granted because they say it's a screener, but once you start to really look under the hood, you might be surprised at what it does. We also took a look to see if whether or not the assessment had a dyslexia screener. So what we have been able to do is we've been able to create a comparison chart for all of you just to begin with. You will see some of the major hitters, if you will, the major folks that are out there. I'm sure some of your screeners are on here as well. And what we were able to do was identify which skills they are indeed assessing. And then what we provided was a one-pager for each one of these assessments that kind of goes through each one of those components that we talked about here with the name, the grade level, the administration, and the language. So if you are wanting to use the chart to be able to identify, I am interested in using Amira and I take a look at a mirror here on the screen, and I'm noticing how do they do across everything here. I notice it's all green. Great. Let me go look at the one pager. It's a little bit over a one page, but let's think of it as a one pager. You know, a quick read in order to say, is this for us? Is this going to meet the needs that we've identified that we have within the district? Let's take a closer look, and allow you to kind of jump that way. Or perhaps this could be used the opposite way. You might be somebody going, you know what, something is not right with our screener, and I can't understand why certain students are sliding through or aren't getting flagged until, you know, the teachers get to this particular unit. Take a look at the screener comparison chart, pull up your one pager for your assessment and see what it is. Perhaps it is the assessment is not going into that depth. Perhaps it is a measure that, excuse me, or a skill that is measured outside of the standard assessment battery, and you haven't opted in for that, but you assumed that it was there. So we're hopeful that this particular document is going to be able to help folks just kind of start a conversation and have conversation about what it is that they need and what decisions they need to make as far as their screeners are concerned. So this particular literacy screening guidance document is also with our PLP website information. So we know technology is great until it's not. And I also know firsthand how frustrating the RIDE website can be to navigate to find things. What we wanted to do was provide for everyone direct links. I know Nicole has been popping them into the chat for you along the way. This way you don't have to worry about copying them all in or opening up all the tabs, or if you somehow accidentally close a tab, you can find your way back. But you'll see that the first link will bring you to just the web page itself. And then we've included the guidance, the FAQ, the sample PLP. What we tried to do this time around is pull out the larger chunks that we knew that people were often asking us for when looking at the PLP guidelines from previous iterations, to be able to help them implement it with their teams and share with their teams as they work through and refine the PLP process. We've also included the literacy mailbox for you. Again, it's literacy@ride.ri.gov. Trish and I and anybody else who we have here on the team at the time usually man that particular inbox, and we try and get you an answer as quick as we can. Sometimes it warrants a phone call because we know that, you know, there are different nuances that occur within the districts. And we want to make sure that we are helping to remove some of those redundancies, as we mentioned earlier, and being able to help folks, you know, better service their students and think about how best to support teachers. So with that, we've come to the end. And Trish, if you could stop the recording. Are there any sort of questions that are popping up